outside.
All right, welcome everyone. It is terrific to see so many names. I want to see more faces this morning. I'm wishing you good morning from California, where it is an early start to the day. Good afternoon to many of you across the Atlantic. Welcome to the Balkan Dialogues Roundtable, this discussion on from regional economic area to a truly common market. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Atlantic Council based in Washington. And I'm just honored to be with such an extraordinary group of doers today to continue this rich tradition in the Balkans dialogue. I'm really pleased that the Council is a partner with all of you today as part of the Council's long-term commitment to supporting U.S. engagement and constructive U.S. engagement in the region, working hand in glove with our European friends, partners, and allies to help support the efforts that many of you are leading on reform to fuel further integration of the Western Balkans into Europe and the transatlantic community. This is a long-term commitment for the Atlantic Council, and it's obviously a soft spot for me personally, an area that I cherish working on at the Council. I'm just really proud that we've been able to give a new home to the Balkans dialogue, welcoming Maja Pisković, based in Belgrade, as one of the instigators of all of this initiative, as an Atlantic Council Fellow in partnership with Sonja Licht on this effort, and bringing in Ambassador Cameron Munter and folks like Jim O'Brien into our family for this conversation. At the Atlantic Council, our commitment is to what we say Balkans forward. How do we actually stay focused on moving forward? And many of you have been doing tremendous work in the region. Many of you are at the heart of economic reforms and progress, and that's what we want to double down today. We've been privileged and pleased to work with many of you on the Western Balkan 6 Partnership Summit process that gathered leaders last year and built on a lot of processes in place, and that aims to convene them again to facilitate and promote concrete steps among leaders towards regional economic cooperation that can stimulate a post-COVID-19 economic recovery, boost the long-term competitiveness of this region, and strengthen its attractiveness for investors. I think this is a goal that everyone signed up today shares. To this effort, we've been at the Atlantic Council focused on how to move the ball forward in discussions on Atlantic Council front page with President Vučić. We're having a follow-up session, President Osmani of Kosovo. We've also had the same type of sessions with Prime Minister Zaev, new leaders in Montenegro. But for this discussion today, which builds on a rich tradition, I want to give a particular thanks to our partner, Sonja Licht, and the Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence for their partnership and their continued commitment to this initiative from its onset back in 2019. I'm going to turn it over to Sonja in just a minute to set the scene. But I also just want to thank the German Marshall Fund, Gordana Delic, for its long-term support through the Balkan Trust for Democracy for this effort, as well as the Norwegian Embassy for its particular support as well. We've got an incredible group of participants, of speakers that are top experts in the field of Western Balkans economic integration. I'm going to leave it to John Jovanovic to introduce our esteemed guests. He'll be moderating our discussion today, a well-known figure in the region. And with that, I want to wish everybody the best of luck with this session. I hope that we can use it to advance some concrete outcomes. And for those of you who are able, turn on your cameras to join the conversation. We recognize some of you are in transit moving or not able to, but for those of you, please do make an effort to turn on your cameras, join the conversation. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Sonja, please.
Thank you, Damon. And let me be a little bit more protocol-wise than usually. And first, thank you for joining the Balkan Dialogues. I mean, we were sad that the East West Institute finished its very valuable lifespan, but we were very happy that there was a wonderful transfer. So thank you once again for being part of this great effort, which I'm very proud to say is surviving, even surviving the COVID crisis for the time being. I hope we will survive other crises as well. And I must say, I'm also very grateful both to Balkan Trust for Democracy of the German Marshall Fund and Norwegian Royal Embassy, that they trusted this initiative and that they accepted many months ago that the first genuine session in this year of the Balkan dialogues has to be about regional cooperation and regional, especially regional economic cooperation. So we did, of course, put on the agenda a very important issue, a very important opportunity for this whole region, especially when we see that hopefully regional cooperation could even move quicker, more substantial than some of the bilateral issues to be solved. So this is, I agree with my colleague Marko Savkovic, who just a few days ago at the meeting said that this is really, for the moment, the only, almost the only real game in the town. So let's play with our whole heart and with all of our knowledge, and hopefully it will really bring something new and quality to the entire region. Of course, the pandemic proved that we are more global than ever. And I do believe that in this very globalized world, and I know you are all here because you believe the same, regional cooperation can make a difference. But of course, we are not the only ones who think that it can make a difference. I don't want to go very far in the history, but I do want to mention that some people, because of believing in regional cooperation, paid with their lives, such as, for example, Georgi Dimitrov, the head of the Communist Party of Bulgaria, immediately after World War II, when he, together with Josip Broz Tito, started dreaming about a Balkan Confederation. I know for some of you, this seems as kind of prehistory. I was more or less born at that time, and I know that immediately after the first conversations, he was invited by Comrade Stalin to Moscow and never returned to Sofia. Many believe that this was exactly the reason, because someone like Stalin could not bear with the possibility that there will be a genuine regional power in the Balkans. I hope these times are far behind us, and in front of us is, first of all, our deep conviction for a long time that we would like to be like the Nordic countries. Then the second model was the Visegrad countries getting together, but obviously every time brings its own challenges. And right now, I believe that what is already on the table is very important to start with. I just remind on one document, and that is the Agenda 2030, or the Green Agenda for the Balkans, that was signed in November in Sofia of all our prime ministers. And I must say, of course, it is easy to sign documents, but it seems that something is really moving. And I believe that part of it is, yes, what was signed and what was agreed, and the other part is that the citizens of this whole region are waking up to some of the major issues that entire human security and lives depend on, and this is exactly how to decarbonize, how to make our environment much, much safer than it is now. So with this, I would like to, I would like only to remind us of something that our dear friend Ivan Vejvoda likes to repeat several times. And this is that the late Prime Minister Đinđić, before he was assassinated, in fact, started advocating the fact that if the entire Balkans would be together, meaning around 50 million people, we would really be an entity that the world and especially Europe should and would count with. So with these words, I am thanking you again, all of you, to be with us today, and hope that you will follow and participate in the Balkan dialogues in the future. And I give over the word to John Jovanovic, our very dear friend, who is with this initiative from the beginning, and one of the people who can be blamed for the initiative. John, please take it over.
Thank you, Sonja. I'll gladly take partial blame for being your close friend, partner, and collaborator. And thank you, Damon, for kindly taking the time this morning. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to another edition of the Balkan Dialogues, where from the beginning we've aimed to bring together doers and thought leaders focused on the region to enhance understanding, cooperation, and also amplify attention on key issues facing the region. Today's discussion, as Sonja mentioned and Damon mentioned, will be on regional economic cooperation, its state, its future. Very honored today to have three leading doers, thought leaders, subject matter experts on this topic. We have Jim O'Brien joining us today from Washington, Vice Chair of the Albright Stonebridge Group. We have Tanja Miščević, Deputy Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council, and we have Matej Zakonjšek, Director of the EU Transport Community. So even though we have limited time, I'd like to just get into the program. First question, and this is for all three of our panelists, sort of with, as Sonja mentioned, with the debut of the Common Regional Market Framework last fall, various approaches to regional economic cooperation appeared to dovetail with one another. And the debate seemed to shift from form to substance, implementation, path forward. Here we are midway through 2021. Where are we on this journey? What's the state of it? And what should we anticipate being the next key obstacles and key challenges? So I'd like to first go to Tanja Miščević with the Regional Cooperation Council.
Thank you very much, John. And I hope that you can hear me because I am outside.
We hear you perfectly. Thank you for kindly joining us while you're in transit. It means a lot.
No, this is actually a regional cooperation and proof that you can jump from Belgrade to Tirana in less than 45 minutes and connect to the discussion with the dear friends from all around Europe as well as from the United States. Very glad to see you all. Let me start with what you just asked, John. Where are we mid-2021 in terms of the developments and the regional cooperation? In my new language, and my new language is the regional integration RCC type vocabulary, that means where are we in terms of reaching deliverables for the Berlin summit, which will be obviously the last of the summits in the Berlin process. Again, you mentioned the common regional market as a very important not only document, but ownership of all Western Balkan 6 that was proved or had a stamp of approval from the leaders back in October Sofia summit. But that could be easily one of the documents without introducing for the first time deliverables. That means the acts and documents that should be reached as a measures of the activity. Matej is also following very closely together with CEFTA and of course together with the RCC the development in that respect. But let me just brief you, to use the opportunity to brief you where are we, as we are talking right now, the Germans, the organizers of the summit, are talking with Sherpas of the Western Balkan 6 exactly on the topic, what will be delivered during the summit. My personal, very positive assessment goes to those 4 agreements that we are all talking about. So that means traveling with the ID, free travel for the third country citizens, mutual recognition agreement, and the recognition of qualification. I'm not so sure that we are going to reach the very 4 agreements until June and until the summit. But we made a breakthrough. Not we, regional organizations, but all Western Balkan 6. They had yesterday a very good discussion about traveling of the around the region only with the IDs. I don't have to explain why this document is so important and how difficult it is to negotiate that type of document, because it also goes very closely into the area of the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. And we have to all of us, we have to be very cautious not to spoil and not to mix into the dialogue, as that would be one very important burden. Short, if you want later to give you much more details, but again, something to go back to what Sonja mentioned, and that is important thing of the green agenda. Yes, green agenda for the Western Balkans. So we actually only have the declaration, but we now will have to devise a set of the measures how to reach the clean 2050 actually Europe and follow this path. And that is something that again we are working with both European Commission as well as Western Balkan 6. But that document is going to be prepared in all elements, and this is not only decarbonization but also recycling, biodiversity, climate changes for Slovenian summit with the Western Balkans, which will be the second half of the year. And I can enumerate also other small and big developments, but I will stop here, of course, with the opportunity to come back with some of the issues. Thanks, John, back to you.
Super helpful, Tanja. Jim, same question to you for a very sort of quick reply, and then I'd like to come back to you with a more detailed question on decarbonization.
Yeah, thanks. And it's wonderful to see everybody. And Tanja, I think I've had to make remarks from the same spot at that near that place in Tirana. So yeah, I think we are about to see a significant reshuffling in the architecture internationally. The Berlin process and the Commission's process toward the region, I think, are now going to come much more together as a result of the political changes coming in Germany. And I hope what we end up with are two things. One is two clear speakers. So we want the region to be able to speak, and that's in a set of informal gatherings, typically, hopefully at 6, occasionally it'll be at smaller numbers. But I think we have to get used to the idea that the leaders in the region will say, we would like to see this or that from the international community. The second side, I think, is hopefully, it would be great to have a reinforced RCC, because I think that's an organization that's dedicated to specific goals that citizens of the region can see. Too often our processes are divorced from daily life. And I think looking at things like the 4 agreements that Tanja discussed and a significant change in the energy mix in the region would be great. That's something the RCC can lead on. So hopefully you then have a true Balkans dialogue, right? But between some of the people in power in the region and the people with authority backed by the international community. That's going to take a renewed American commitment, something that touches on both the economic and social issues that are part of the EU acquis, but as well as the harder security issues that will come with more American involvement. So I think it's hopefully a simplifying of the regional architecture. It's coming soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. Matej, same quick response from you on where we are in the journey, and then I'd like to come back to you with a more detailed question on green lanes and infrastructure.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. This is indeed the example of our, let's say, regional and regional cooperation, together with Tanja, together with you and the rest, to really have the vision of where we want to move. And of course, my role here is specifically to give the transport and even more important, what the transport brings, and that's the connectivity. And this is the agenda that is, I think, our common agenda, because of course, it should not be about trains and planes and roads. It should be what those mean. And that is the basis of what we try to do. And as Tanja and everybody else who was ever living in the region mean, it's sometimes easier to connect via Istanbul or via Vienna to actually do a distance of few hundred kilometers. This is not only unsustainable in the terms of time that people spend, or how much time they need to travel, but also it's not sustainable environmentally. So we do need to do some basic work, and this is really to have the region which is connected, and which is connected in a network of roads, of rail, of inland waterways for businesses as well as for people, of course. And for that element, there are two very important points which I always like to stress. First is this network effect. So the region needs to start thinking, and this is our role as a transport community, as a transport network that connects all these different modes of transport. And secondly, and this is even more important or equally important, is it also have to think regionally. So perhaps, think globally, plan regionally, and implement locally. So, and this is where our role as a transport community, but also, for example, our sister organization of energy community, and Tanja and everybody else tries to bring, that it's not enough to think about where your 100-kilometer in the road will be within the country, but you have to start thinking, how does this connect to the neighboring regional participants, to the EU member states, and so on. And this is really the key. So think, globally, but really implement locally with the regional perspective.
Perfect. Thank you, Matej. And that's a perfect segue into sort of my next question. Jim, you talked a lot about sort of redesigning or simplifying the framework around unifying principles, and one of those clearly is going to be decarbonization. And we've seen just this week alone, in one day, the Dutch courts sent Shell back to the drawing board saying you have to figure out a better, more aggressive plan for decarbonization. Here in the United States, we had ExxonMobil lose a very heated proxy fight with a small environmentally driven investment fund owning a fraction of its company, but really standing up for a lot of the pace of decarbonization. That's clearly a unifying principle. But Jim, you very well know that there are certain socioeconomic realities in the Western Balkans that we also have to grapple with. How will those two sort of come together, and where do you see the best opportunity to pursue decarbonization in the near term?
No, and I think I'd just say on this, John, I wish you were out there still working on this, because I think having the kind of practical work.
My wife likes me home, though, she says so.
That's I think that's a real thing to be proud of, that your wife wants you to be home. But I'd say I think there are a couple things. One is around the framing. The most significant political comment I heard in the last couple of years was around the Yellow Vest protests in France, where somebody said, Macron talks about the end of the world. We're concerned with the end of the month. And I think it's important that we meet people where they live. That is a strong green economic agenda, I think, in a couple of senses. So the first point is just people's health. I mean, Sarajevo, Belgrade, and Pristina were the three most polluted capital cities in the world for a time in 2020. That's not great. And so I think everyone looks at that, and some politicians say, that's a mark of prosperity, but it was in 1888, but it shouldn't be today. The second problem is that these plants are breaking down. So the sort of Yugoslav era coal infrastructure was built in the late 60s through the 70s. Things get old and they get creaky. And so there's going to need to be a rethinking of whether we reinvest in those plants, as is sort of underway, or we look at something new. And that is, I think, the third element, which is, where's the new money going to come into the region? So if we look around, we see that, the European Commission says it has 29 billion euro over the next few years for investment in the region. A lot of that should be going to green. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The European Investment Bank and the EBRD have tens of billions of euro more in investment that's available to the region, but that probably won't go there unless we identify the green projects. So there's a lot of money that is available to put into these projects, and all of those investors are looking for green and other projects. I mean, I see Goran Svilanovic here, he knows this very well. So what's the issue in front of us right now? My concern is that we're going to misspend this money. Like, a lot of it will not be designed and put to work in the Western Balkans because people aren't developing large-scale projects. There's a lot of great small-scale work happening, but the grids aren't yet up to snuff. The ability to transfer energy isn't fully locked in, and the policy frameworks need to be improved. Now, what you hear from political leaders, and I think a few weeks ago, many of you were in a conversation that the Atlantic Council hosted with President Vučić. I think he gave a very honest answer on the green transition. He said, look, our economy is growing. We're doing reasonably well right now. So make me an offer if we have to move away from coal. And there's a risk that Serbia is increasing its coal dependence, right? It's putting in 7 district heating facilities for the 7 biggest cities in Serbia. And they're going to power that with coal. They're talking about opening new coal mines. This is not going to work. And again, let's meet people at the end of the month. A reason it's not going to work is that the European Union is going to start requiring that the 6 Western Balkan countries pay for carbon. There'll be a border adjustment tax, or there'll be a carbon cost, which has gone from what, 30 euro, did it top 100 euro recently, the cost per ton of carbon? That's a charge on every economic activity in the Western Balkans that is not being paid, but that is going to be paid in a year or two. So you're getting a substantial increase in the cost of economic activity in this region. And it's going to mean that people aren't able to get jobs and their industries aren't able to compete unless we make a green transition. So then, and I will wrap up quickly, you look at what's on offer. The European Union last year put forth its proposal for the Commission on the proposal of its priority investment projects. It's not green at all. There's one hydroelectric facility in Albania, and then there's a talk about a small loan facility for SMEs to become energy efficient. The rest of the stuff is all kind of concrete and asphalt. And I'm sorry, Matej, I know that was part of what you were talking about, but we need to revise this and bring the investment program for the region in line with the EU's investment project for itself that says at least 30% of all money has to go to the green transition. And frankly, I think the Western Balkans can absorb much more. That's the place. Just 2 practical points. So how do we do that, right? That's always the problem. Well, one of them is, I think this is an area for an invigorated American engagement. I know Robert Morgan, who's on here, is thinking about that. It's a place where the small amounts of money available from the US DFC can trigger much larger European investments if we identify the practical projects. And here, I want to give credit to the political leadership of the region, because they've now twice said that they are willing to put senior political leadership into projects into identifying green transition projects. They did it last summer at an event that the Atlantic Council hosted. And then several of the leaders have said that they will do that as well. The meeting of the, just the 3, which is controversial, said last October, we're happy to have people sit down and identify large-scale green transition projects. I think if we begin to do that, people will see there's money coming into their economies, that it's dedicated to sustainable, non-polluting technologies that will create jobs that will last them, not just to the end of this month, but going forward. And without that kind of structure, we're going to misspend all this money. And the result is a lot of it either won't be spent or will be spent on old things that will not help this economy survive as we head into the newer requirements of European economies. Sorry. Back to you, John.
No, look, that was spot on. Thank you for really sort of simplifying that down to, the tangible points that meet people at the end of the month. I like that. I may steal that, Jim, and pass it off as my own. So I hope you're okay with that. But It's a very
It's
elegant
the
way to describe it.
French yellow vest protester looking for you.
Tanja, can we go to you next, sort of on some of the other frictions that the RCC, I think, has shown great success in eliminating and overcoming, namely the roaming charges and other sort of barriers to doing business across the Western Balkan Six. You know, a key lesson learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in the region, is really the value of digitalization, the value of e-governance tools. So, you know, when you think about the next obstacle that will need to be overcome in the region, so more countries can sort of reap the benefits of digitalization, is the RCC thinking about that? If so, how? And by the way, it's not just for efficiency of services being delivered in a time of crisis, but we all know that the uplift and benefits to transparency and good governance across the board can be reaped. So digitalization is a tool. How is the RCC thinking about it?
I hope that you can hear me. Is it okay?
Yep, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. I do see here with us Jelić Aminić and Goran Jovanovic, and they of course know much better how RCC was visionary enough to include the digital aspect of the cooperation or even integration in the region several years ago. That was noticed as one of the issues where, as the new technology can be introduced, as we were at almost the same level in terms of starting with developing digital agenda for each and every of the Western Balkan Six. So what we are doing right now is on several fronts. First of all, to scan the situation. So to find out how we are going with the broadband, with introducing 5G in all of the Western Balkan Six. That is one area we cannot help in terms of building, but at least to find out, is there the common denominator or the common starting point for each and every of six of us. The second issue, as you mentioned, is how to use the digital possibilities. And this is the issue of the building the human capacities. And we notice, especially, and we had demands during the pandemic, the women are also very much interested in upgrading their level of knowledge and skills in terms of using digital. And the third part of the work in the respect of using digital is definitely the research and development. Again, as the innovation, as the part of the innovation agenda. The most successful story, as you mentioned, is the roaming at home that will start to be applied beginning of 1st of July, but only for the Western Balkan Six. The next step is to deal with those issues in terms of enlarging it with the European Union. Just to remind all of us, this is not the national authority story, but the private companies which provide, which are the providers for the digital exchange. And it does not depend only on the state, but it's of course private money, and in that respect, it's not easy as a decision. Yes, back to you, John.
Thank you, Tanja. That's perfect. Matej, last question for you, and then I'd like to open it up to Q&A sooner rather than later, just because we have so many thought leaders on the call. You know, talk about success during COVID-19. The success of the green lanes was truly remarkable. And the goal of your office is really, as I've always understood it, to really prepare the Western Balkan Six countries to connect properly into where the EU will be, not necessarily where the EU is at this given moment. How do you foresee that landscape shifting in terms of infrastructure and other pieces of connectivity? And also, how do you and your office grapple with the sometimes slow pace of the political process?
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, to answer this question, we first need to know how Europe will look like infrastructure and transport-wise in a year to come. And just perhaps allow me to say that I believe that the future of transport as such, being in Europe and beyond, will very much be increasingly A, connected, B, green, and C, shared. What I mean with that is that, first of all, the process of digitalization and the data will really determine how we move. And it will also be the new business model which will determine whether the companies of the future will succeed or not. And I think that this is really an important element of this digitalization as the Tanja move is exactly this part. Of course, we will also be moving increasingly into the mobility as a service, where the focus is less on the object of travel, such as car, plane, and so on, but what the travel should achieve. The green element, you have stressed it yourself, we are entering the age of electricity and clean energy. So here also in transport, we see a big move towards electric cars on the roads, perhaps hydrogen for the trucks, or the LNG for the ships in the future. And of course, the ownership model is also changing. The Ford T was a model as a symbol of freedom. Now I think it's more freedom if you don't need to take care of your insurance bills on a yearly basis and so on. So how does this kind of connect to where the Western Balkans should be the transport-wise? And here we are working together with our partners to actually put together for the first time sustainable and smart mobility strategy for the entire region, which is based on the EU's strategy, which was developed and presented in December last year. But it really comes down to investment in the project, which should be sustainable, and sustainable with a big S, being environmentally as well as fiscally, socially, and of course in any other way. Now, I would just like to reply in that respect to Mr. O'Brien. So one of his concerns is that, for example, in transport, the investments should go in, let's say, the wrong way. But here, if you see what's the project pipeline in the Western Balkans when it comes to transport, you see a big shift towards more green, more sustainable modes of transport. And that specifically means rail and rail infrastructure. As you know, the rail in the region has been in certain elements better maybe 30 years ago than it is now. So it's absolutely necessity that we modernize the rail and we really bring the network not only back where it was, but of course even better. And that then we have the connections between the rail and the ports, and with the intermodal units, the rivers being Danube, Sava, or the ports such as the one in Albania or Montenegro. So this is really the case. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the roads will not be built, but even for the roads, the future of the finances for the roads, anybody who will want to get the money or in grants or loans from the European financial institution will have to prove how even the roads have the green elements inside, being the charging stations for the car, or so how do they contribute with the ITS technologies and so on. So increasingly so, if not even from the political design, even from the economic and financial design, the project will need to show a very strong green component. So I am quite confident that transport-wise, specifically when it comes to the greener modes of transport, the region will look very different in, let's say, 5 to 10 years than it looks now.
Thank you, Matej. Jim, response?
No, I'm happy to hear it. I think the overall mix is still troubling, particularly around the priority, but I think it goes to the important point that the people who are expert in developing these projects should be given the authority to actually carry them through. I worry that the bureaucratic infrastructure right now is oriented toward projects governments traditionally like. And I think the renewable energy mix and a new transport mix and a service focus mix is a lot more smaller projects that need a supporting infrastructure in supporting environment than it is a bunch of big old projects that make for a nice ribbon cutting. And so it takes a different bureaucratic infrastructure. But I'm encouraged that Matej is focused on this.
Matej, sorry, one follow-up question on that. Jim brings up a good point where you have to strike this delicate balance between what you think the governments are looking for today to keep them engaged as key stakeholders with what you're trying to foresee around the corner, the EU evolving to, or being their underlying need, or being able to sort of catalyze the private sector. How do you sort of keep that balance?
Well, I think indeed I would put this perspective of, let's say, smaller projects, perhaps in the view of also reforms that need to happen. And this is one issue which I keep repeating, which we keep repeating, that infrastructure projects, specifically in transport, of course, in our case, needs to go hand in hand with the reform process. And indeed, these reform processes are sometimes not as visible, of course, as the new railway line is or anything else. But for this railway line or for any connectivity projects to be sustainable, so to be maintained in the future, to be actually connected to something logical on the other hand and so on, the reform process is equally, if not even more important. And that's why we're always working on these two parallel tracks. But now, of course, the reform process is also the most difficult process. And here, how do you get the reform? How do you keep the reform process going on? And for that, the essential thing is there is a clarity of where we are traveling, so that there is a vision supported by the leaders, and that there is enough pressure for the reform process to keep going. So that is, we need this fuel for the reforms. So clear goals and strong leadership in order for administration to do the reform that is needed to do, and of course then to projects to follow in that respect. But this is the double track that we can never lose our eyes from.
Thank you, Matej. I could speak about infrastructure. Yes, please, Tanja. Of course, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on not only reforms, but something that Jim mentioned as extremely important. That actually there will be, and there is enough money or funds for not only reforms, not only for the roads, but also for the green, but we will not be able to use them. And that is a very harsh truth that we have to have in mind. I'm afraid that the capacity of the government is not enough. Only yesterday, I think Srđan Majstorović shared with us the initiative back from 2011, if I'm not wrong, Srđan, to start using and including Western Balkan 6 into the IPA or European funds much more in terms to start learning how to use that money. So that was 10 years ago, and we are still using only a bit and pieces. We are not equipped, unfortunately, even now to fully use even available money for the green recovery. It's not only the issue of the projects, how to prepare projects. We don't know how to do that. I mean, generally speaking, on the massive scale, but also how to start implementing those projects. The companies are not equipped. We do not have enough engineers to deal with the project. That might become a huge problem. And in that respect, I think that one of the very important issues is how to use the capacity of the civil society, which is extremely strong in terms of the green agenda, climate changes. Some type of synergy has to be established, and we are trying devising the action plan on green agenda to work with the regional civil society forum in that respect, that we would like to see included into the process. That is one of the big issues to discuss further. Thank you.
Tanja, that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and I think including a call to action for civil society and to use them as sort of an enhancer to some of the institutional capabilities makes a tremendous amount of sense. I would also encourage you guys to think about ways in which to catalyze the private sector and others to really build up. It's not just a matter of focus, right? Just a matter of sometimes the capabilities to do it. I'd like to I could talk about infrastructure with you guys till everyone else here falls asleep. So that would quickly transition to a question from our colleague and partner, Marko Savkovic, who's a co-author of a recent paper, Economic Cooperation Between Serbia and Kosovo in the Context of the Regional Market, for a question.
Yes, hello to all. Good day. I hope you can all hear me, and very happy to be here with you. I have a couple of questions actually, and these are two of them have been asked to me, to the panel I participated in a couple of days ago with colleagues from Democracy for Development in Pristina. And I guess that Jim O'Brien would be the best person to answer this question. One, and I think it's also very political. One is, what does Kosovo stand to gain? And this is another initiative from participating in mini Schengen. And the other is, what does Kosovo have to contribute with to mini Schengen as a contributing partner to the whole process? Which also brings me to the question for Ms. Miščević, Professor Miščević, and that is how the two processes, are they still going on in parallel, referring to mini Schengen? Where do they tie in? How do you think of concrete ways to achieve this? Because we feel that there is a need somehow to explain, even to the wider public, where the two processes meet. And question for Mrs. Zakonjšek concerns that there is, it is something that has been brought to my attention lately, and that is the issue of waiting time at the borders, not between the Western Balkan 6, but where the biggest queue is, are border crossings, Batrovci and Horgoš, so to two EU member states. How can the Western Balkan 6 address this issue? Because it is now really being reported as, I mean, it's a problem every year, every summer, and so on, but it is now being reported as a major problem for exporters. Thank you.
Marko, thank you. So first question to you, Jim. Kosovo, what does it have to contribute? What does it have to gain?
Wait, sorry, you broke up there in the pointed question to me.
No worries. So the first question was for you, Jim. What does Kosovo have to contribute to the common regional market, and what does it really have to gain?
So I think there are a couple things. So what it has to contribute, I think, the two pieces. One is it has the youngest population in the region. I think you have the youngest population in the region living next door to the oldest population in the region. Also, because there's no visa liberalization, you may have more of the population available in Kosovo than you do of the working age population in a couple of the other countries of the region. That's a demographic resource that's the key to all economic growth, and it's wasted right now by the way Kosovo is cut off, particularly from Bosnia and Serbia. It only hurts Bosnia and Serbia's economies as well as Kosovo's. What does Kosovo have to gain? It has everything to gain. Kosovo is a country of 1.5 to 2 million people, depending on which kind of census estimate you believe. It's landlocked, and it's emerging from a very difficult, and with a recent war and a difficult political transition. Its future depends on being part of a larger economic element. When you look at the numbers that, and these now are a couple of years old, but they're the newest ones we have. If a German company outsources something to Slovakia, it takes it 5 days, costs €5. Serbia, about 12 and 13. By the time you get to Kosovo, it's 66 days, €76, or maybe it's 76 days and €66. It's just economically not competitive until it is part of a more efficient, larger economic unit. And that's critical. And that unit will benefit from all that Kosovo has. I'm going to add one final element that's worth thinking about. One thing Kosovo has not suffered from the last 20 years is a lot of international engagement. So you've had some of the most innovative international agencies, especially our militaries, all over Kosovo for a long time. That's a bedrock of exposure to innovation and probably a lot of resources being left behind that's probably worth exploring. It's not the answer to everything, but it's worth taking a look at as a unique asset that Kosovo will bring to the region, as well as its population.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim. Marko, would you mind, Tanja had technical issues while you were asking your question. Would you mind just briefly repeating Tanya's question?
Yes, well, it's the whole issue and thing. I mean, something that we are getting a lot of feedback on is, are there still two parallel processes? Are these two processes competitive anyway, thinking of common regional market and the Miščević initiative? And if they are, when and where they will tie in? I mean, when and where will they be brought together somehow under one framework? That's the question.
I think that I get it. Yes, it still puzzles us that leaders are mentioning mini Schengen, while at the same time they accepted the common regional market consists of 4 freedoms with additions like all other innovation agenda and all other things. So to be honest, I don't care how they call it, if they are participating and if they are producing results in that respect, and all 6 of them. Of course, I'm not so politically illiterate to understand that the mini Schengen is much catchy than the common regional market as an idea. But we also saw a lot of moves even from those speaking about mini Schengen instead of common regional market in respecting what they agree during Sofia summit. So bottom line, yes, even for us, from time to time, we are puzzled what they are thinking when they are talking about mini Schengen, but when they are speaking about the elements, then we recognize that they are actually talking about the agenda, which is the common regional market. Marko, this is okay? That was the question. Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Tanja. Matej, the last part of Marko's question for you.
Indeed, borders should not be the source of frustration, but should really be a symbols of good neighborly cooperation. And indeed, within the Western Balkans, but specifically with the EU member states, passengers as well as the freight waits too long. We know all the statistics, and just to mention one, the logistics is much more expensive actually in the region than it is in the EU. And one of the reasons is indeed that for the same amount of work within the region, the average company needs 5 times more trucks. And this is when we are talking about the transport network. 5 times more trucks means 5 times more emissions, means the road safety, means degradation of the roads. So one problem actually brings a lot of other problems, and as well as the solution. Solution to that problem should have a positive effect to many other forms. So here, you have mentioned, John, before green lanes, and let me just take this in at this stage. During the pandemic, in the Western Balkans, together with RCC and CEFTA, we have reacted very quickly with our regional partners and the European Commission and established the internal green lanes, which basically prioritize specifically the goods which are needed, such as medical equipment, perishable goods. And because of that, there was never a lack of those goods in the Western Balkans during the height of the pandemic. Now, of course, and also I just want to add, this has happened in 1 month from thinking about it to actually having it operational on the ground. So whoever said that the things don't move or they won't move too slowly in the Western Balkans, where there is a political dedication, things can move at the speed of light. But now basically going to your question, what do we do with the current situation? And of course, one thing that we are trying to do is indeed to go towards more integrated border crossings, specifically and also with the EU member states. And for that is really a topic that needs a top-down approach. This is the borders bring together transport as one part, but ministries of interior, Schengen, customs, phytosanitary inspection. So it really brings the entire ecosystem together to make a change. And you always need this twice on each side of the border. So this is exactly where we need a clear dedication also from the top, that this should be something that should be addressed. And there are many reasons for that. And I think this is very much recognized by all leaders in the region. And I think, and I hope that we will see a specific steps in that direction in coming month, or really, in coming meetings. So this is really my wish.
Thank you. Thank you, Matej. And guys, if as you have questions, if anyone would like to ask a question, please message via the chat. I see Cameron, Ambassador Munter, question from you. Ambassador, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, hard to imagine, but thank you very much. And I'm very encouraged to hear that at the working level, or as at the end of the month level, that you are really working through some issues. And I'd like to ask, especially Jim and perhaps Tanja, to speculate about where we'll be in 6 months, especially when we think of the German elections and some other changes. As the structures that we've been working with for many years, the Berlin process, et cetera, let's say wind down, we think of new initiatives. You may have noticed that just in the last few days, I with Valbona Zanelli wrote a little piece about how we would like to, expand the base of what the EU does with the people in the region. And indeed, Heather Connolly from CSIS kind of echoed the same idea in a piece that just came out yesterday. So I'd look first to you, Jim, and then perhaps to Tanja. What do we expect politically in the next 6 months among the Europeans that might make the kind of detail that you're talking about more palatable to the Europeans, and indeed get beyond just working with leaders and getting it down to the working level, if that makes some sense, Jim?
Yes, such a nicely phrased but evil question. I think, so thanks, Cameron. I think a few things, and I'd recommend everyone look at Cameron and Valbona's piece in the National Interest, the sort of argument that the Commission should engage civil society more, right? The hard question is how, and what meaning does that have in a process where you are, as Matej's talked about, you're trying to identify specific changes in government policies. So what's the role of the civil society voice? But I think it's a really important step. I want to maybe, rather than predicting, I'll offer a couple thoughts on proposing. One of them is, I think you need an effective contact group for the Western Balkans. And this is going to be the US, which will be deciding its policy over the next few months, and will finally have its people in place. The new German government, I think they need to find an approach that will include Paris, who I think is obviously in a political cycle and disruptive. But having said that, then there's a need to have a couple of other European countries serve as Sherpas. Austria is playing a very interesting role in the COVID related diplomacy, and maybe it can play there. Identifying practical initiatives that the US and Europe can take together that will address security issues as well as the political and economic issues. I think the second thing is I want some transparency to citizens about what is being done. So in the exchange that Matej and I had, I agree, there are a lot of people doing incredibly important work on renewables, on revising the transport infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, et cetera. It's not clear to me where the center of gravity is though. Like that, what's the overall picture? If we reform 2 railways, how much have we improved the overall energy picture of the region? And if I were a citizen, I'd kind of want to know that. And so that kind of quick scorecard is something we should all have. One of the elements I think should be in that is the overall direction of the investment program heading into the region. Because there are fabulous 50 and 100 megawatt renewable energy projects taking root across the region. But it's not apparent that that's the majority of energy investment, or that in 5 years, that's going to, the renewables will make up the majority of at least new installed power across the region. And having a few simple scorecards, money, kilowatt hours, just a couple of things that can say to us, hey, we're making progress. That then will motivate citizens, but also allow for the political leadership to come in and help all the people who are doing outstanding work at the senior working levels. So that'd be my hope, that we get those things in place over the next few months.
Thank you. Tanja, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, sorry, just the internet is not very strong here, and that is the issue of digital. Ambassador, you pose a very good question, as there is a huge question mark. What is going to happen when Berlin summit of the Berlin process, the last one, comes home? That means when the process that started 7 years ago actually will be finished. Again, just a small reminder, this process was built by Chancellor in order to not to replace the European integration, but to help connectivity. That was the buzzword at the beginning. Obviously, as we see, Matej is vouching that in that respect, we are improving. Again, for the first time in the investment program that has been introduced and presented last year but by Commissioner Varhelyi, the projects from the very beginning of the connectivity are now becoming are now funded actually and going to be developed. But there are so many leftovers. There are so many things that they are not going to be finished until the Berlin summit, and that is a big issue to discuss among the leaders of the Western Balkan States, as well as the EU, as well as the United States. How to use the, if I may use the terminology of the European Union, this acquis that has been built up to now in terms of the Berlin process, a positive one. There are a lot of developments in that respect, and to make it even stronger, but this time working much more on the ownership by the Western Balkans. The very good fact is that the second half of this year, there will be a Slovenian presidency of the European Union, and I don't have any information, but I'm sure that the summit in Ljubljana, or Slovenian summit during the presidency, will be dedicated also to this issue. Even the Bled Forum, which will be before that, if I'm not wrong, Matej maybe knows much better the timetable, or somebody else, before the summit, the actual summit, will also have a discussion on the developments in that respect. But my knowledge and the information that I have show me the interest to continue what has been done up to now during the Berlin process in terms of developing further, but focusing much more on displaying the ownership of the Western Balkans, which is the fact that we still do not have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. The next question goes to Gordana Delic, our partner and good friend at the German Marshall Fund. And then I'd like to come to Mr. Goran Svilanovic.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Really nice to see you all. I just wanted to ask a question. I'm not even sure to whom to direct it, probably to all of our speakers, but it's really wonderful to hear about all these regional initiatives, projects, and so on. And indeed, we also do notice that there is more of regional cooperation happening in the region in the last, let's say, year or two. However, I must say that increasingly also for dubious purposes. Now, my question, I guess, is how to make sure that this positive notion of the regional cooperation doesn't become some sort of a fig leaf in the future for cooperations we would like to discourage rather than encourage to be happening in the region. And I think this is important because, as many other things, this can also be abused and receive a negative connotation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Gotsu. Who'd like to take that one first? Not all at once, because I hope not to take it. So Matej, it maybe goes to you.
Well, my immediate answer to that would always be that if there is a clarity of goals, if there is a motivation, and the only motivation for me, of course, in the transport community is the EU accession, and the dynamics that brings. That is the motivator, that is the fuel that we need for the reforms, for the projects to be well coordinated, to be placed on the trans-European network, for that to make sense, and so on. So I think the more clarity there is from all sides on this clear perspective, and what Commission is doing with the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, with the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. So when this is coming together, and when there is a dedication for the region and the simple signals that this is actually moving, then we can reassure that is actually moving in the right direction. It doesn't fizzle out into various, let's say, a patchwork effect of a project there, project then, finance this way, finance other way. So that's the only way. And of course, for that, we know that this integral process of not only the region in the terms of the participants in the region, but also and specifically neighboring EU member states. Many of them were mentioned already today, and also EU as such is essential for that to happen, to continue in this positive way, and not perhaps the scattered in a various different elements.
Perfect. Thank you, Matej. Thank you, Gotsu. Next, I'd like to turn to Goran Svilanovic, who has an excellent question on energy and decarbonization.
Well, thank you, John. I don't want to take too much of a time. I have asked a question in writing, therefore, just wanted to point out. I hear well what Matej has said and highly appreciate. Thank you very much. Electrification of transport, it is huge, but where will this electricity come from? Not in one of our countries. We have seen in the last 20 years a big power generator being built. Hydro, coal, lignite, green, nothing big is being built. Hugely important for transport, but on the other hand, there is a lot of geopolitics there. And I think who we are missing in this conversation is another Slovene head of the energy community, because I think we have missed the opportunity in the last 10 years to communicate to the broader public the relevance of the energy transition. And now the EU is going green, and not one of ours is ready. Therefore, I know the efforts invested by Jim. Thank you very much, Jim, and I'm ready to support. But there is a need to do much more in communicating with the leaders, but also with the broader public, because now we already have civil sector speaking up against closing down of the coal mines and coal power generators. So it is happening as we speak. And it was today a meeting between the President Vučić and the union of the Kolubra coal mine, who they are putting a pressure. They want a minister down because she said only this, what I'm saying, that we have to close down. So come on, guys, there is a need to really engage. As I've said, stop here, a lot of geopolitics. And I wanted to say, the energy transition is as important as rule of law in my eyes. This is really going to define the position of countries in the coming years. And I would really invite the US to work very closely with the EU in this respect, to build the broader public and the leadership to go for it. The opportunity is now, and the money is there, frankly. I think that Tanja was kindly telling us the money is there, but whether we are able or not to drag it in. So the effort is needed there. I'll stop. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Goran. Now I'll tack on just a brief little addition to that question for both Matej and for Jim. The role of natural gas in this transition. Is it to be leapfrogged, or does it have a role in the region? But first.
You gave me the floor. I just missed that, if I was right.
You have the floor for sure.
Okay, so basically, very shortly, I can be quite short. Yes, unfortunately or fortunately, the energy is, transport is the biggest user of energy, or one of the biggest users of energy. However, the energy sources are something that, of course, we also need to have a debate. And for that, the energy community is really the right address, and Mr. Kopač. But indeed, I was also just referring to what was mentioned before. And I think, in every webinar, we can wait for that keyword to come, and it always comes at one point, and this is communication. Yeah, how we are communicating, and there is always a room to communicate better of what we are doing. I think that and in transport, the one way that we are trying to do that is really to take this mentality away, or to change it slowly, that we should not be talking about, or we should not only be talking about a certain means of transport or certain roads, but what does this connectivity mean? What does it mean for a citizen? And I think that indeed, in kind of bringing up the other questions that were in as well, citizens understand very well when a transport network works good, and specifically also when it doesn't work well. And here, I think that the concerted effort of everybody around this table, and perhaps also from other friends, is necessary to really improve on that. And I think this is also one of my, let's say, not the only goal, but also one of the very important goals, so to communicate better.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, Goran put all this much better than I could. I think on natural gas, I think it's an open question. First, the UK found natural gas much less important to its transition than it expected. About a decade ago, it got 40% of its electricity from coal. It thought that it would replace at least a quarter to 40% of that with natural gas. It ended up using none, or 1% or less, and then none. That's because renewables are cheaper. Now, in the region, there's obviously a security of supply issue as well, but I'm honestly confused. I think there are three major natural gas ideas being discussed, one down from Hungary, one up from Greece, and one in Albania. I'm not sure how much demand there is, whether it will support all of the capital investment for all of that. I just haven't seen anyone run a comparative analysis, and I think that would be really interesting. But the fundamental point is natural gas. A decade ago, we talked about it as the key transition fuel to reduce carbon emissions. I think the latest carbon accounting suggests it doesn't reduce emissions at all. There may be economic and security reasons to shift to it away from coal, but it probably is not the climate answer. And economically, there's the question of how sustainable it is as well.
Look, I know I'm probably breaking protocol as a moderator, but I think this issue of energy transition and decarbonization in the region is both the most pressing challenge and the most compelling opportunity. And I think the more that we could focus on solving the problems of today, or to use a Jim-ism, which I love Jim-isms, solve for the end of the month is crucial. Because I think you're seeing it manifest itself day in and day out in terms of public health, in terms of civil engagement, in terms of thinking about how do you build a sustainable economy of the future with nearshoring and supply chains in flux after COVID-19. We all want the region to be super competitive and attracting more of the supply chains of tomorrow, but some of these issues have to be grappled with. And so thank you, Goran, for your question. I'd like to go to Sonja Majstorovic next. Sorry, Sonja, I don't see the hand raising things. The powers that be see those, so they just told me that you had a question. And we'll probably have time for one or two more.
Thank you very much, John. I'm sorry, I was a bit late due to the traffic jam in Belgrade and pollution that it creates, so didn't get about the signaling. I just wanted to draw the attention to the elephant in the room, and this is a question of how the issues connected to what we are talking about, and what we are talking about is basically a sustainable development of the region, and creating this cross-border network is pending on what Matej just said on communication. And he's right. A lot of these seminars and conferences are dwelling on this issue of communication, but communication starts with a political credibility and political commitment to the goal. If you're committed to what you're preaching, then it should not be difficult to communicate. And I agree with Ambassador Manters and Valbona's article when they are arguing for more inclusion of the civil society organizations into the process of the EU accession. But in a sense, they're also dissecting the very problem that the region is facing, and this is the lack of administrative and institutional capacities and democracy in general. That's my question to our distinguished panel: is how to appease, how to create the equibalance between the carrot and the stick. It is obvious that the region cannot progress itself. It is obvious that it depends on a foreign investment. And I must say that I don't have any problem with these investments coming from China, Turkey, or whatever. The problem is that the European regulations are not being respected. For that, the government should be responsible and accountable. Thus, depending on the influx on foreign funds, but at the same time risking to fund the autocrats of the region, this is my question: how to create this equibalance between the carrot and the stick?
These are tough questions, guys. I'm glad I'm the moderator. Who'd like to take this one? Jim?
I'm talking way too much. I think it's a great question. It boils down to the internationals working with both, everyone in the region, leaders and communities, need to be clear about what we want. Right now, we're talking green, but our money's not green. And it's not clear how all this adds up to a real transition. So let's be clear. And then I think I'd start with the carrots. The people who are making the reforms get the money. Sticks, yeah, I agree. Let's enforce the EU regulations. I'm a little puzzled at how lax the requirements are some of the time. How do you do that? You need a small group. I think it's in the region, and then it's US, Germany, the Commission, Paris. And honestly, we need a couple states that are closer to the region. EU member states. Yeah.
I think the EUA carbon credits traded up, Jim, as you were speaking. So let's see them now. But we have time for one
Elon
last.
Musk, I had no financial interest in what I was discussing.
I've always thought you were the Elon Musk of regional economic cooperation, Jim. So we have time for one more question, and then I'd like to go back to Sonja Licht to close this out. But Miodrag Milosavljević, if you still have a question, that'd be great to turn it over to you. Yeah, with that, Sonja, I'd love to pass it over to you. Blessed are the punctual, for they shall be reinvited. So I just want to make sure that we started as close to on time as we could and end on time. So Sonja, please.
First of all, thank you, John, for a great moderation. And I want to thank the panelists for a very, very substantial panel. And our own organization, Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence, is involved in a long-term regional project on sustainable use of energy with the support of GIZ. We started in 2011. And somehow while listening to your discussion, I suddenly felt proud that we managed to start as a network of civil society organizations and still continue on the same path. Like right now, in fact, starting a new cycle by trying to bring green parliamentarians together. First, to inspire the parliaments to get much more involved in exactly these issues, and second, to bring the parliamentarians together. Another group that should be mentioned when we talk about, I dare to say, broad coalitions in the countries to really take up the fight for a genuine energy transition. I agree with Jim. It is absolutely crucial. And in fact, you all said it in different words. In the same time, I fully agree with Srdjan as well. We need that infamous political will. And this is why I mentioned at the very beginning the pressure from bottom up. The pressure from bottom up is rising. Every single day, there is something happening in Serbia, and seriously happening. We see for the first time outstanding artists, outstanding public figures, joining the grassroots activities, joining the civil society. And this is not only Serbia. So in fact, where I think we need to really continue our reflections and our action is how to bring in the middle ground, how to make sure that those who are powerful enough to influence the entire situation, and this is business, for example, as John mentioned, business associations and trade unions, social economic councils, whatever, local governments, some of them very interested because this is to be or not to be for them. In fact, I plead for a broad coalition on one side, and I very much am on Jim's side, that we need a new contact group, a really strong contact group that would deal with this topic, of course, together with the energy community. And then if we manage to bring all these actors together on the regional level also, of course, very much counting with RCC, I hope we can come up with a consistent message that will encompass everybody, from the European Commission to the member states, to the civil society, and it needs to be as efficient as possible. We do not have time to waste. And I think for me, this is the most important message also of the panel today. There is no time to waste. If our region and the entire Balkans really want to remain on its European path. Thank you all for participation.
Thank you, Sonja, and thank you for leading us with that very thoughtful and wise call to action. But once again, thank you for everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you to our esteemed panel for taking the time, nearly all of whom are in transit. Jim, Matej, thank you so much. Tanja, thank you so much for joining under these harsh circumstances, really appreciate it. And Damon, thank you as well for kicking us off. This has been an edition of Balkan Dialogues. We hope very soon to be convening you all in person to continue these important discussions. So for now, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, au revoir.